tonight. I'm out. You can see I've got the bike running. It's been running for, that's 10 minutes, but I was a bit slow starting my timer. So it's definitely up to temperature now. Oil pressure's dropped to about 15, but as soon as you rev it, it goes back up. So the oil's definitely hot. I did change my fuel line for this, I think it's Tygon. It's more like the sort of fuel line you'd use on a like a lawnmower or a chainsaw or something like that. But I found the proper fuel line that I got, even though this is the thinnest stuff I could get, is just too thick. And so it's hard to get it to bend properly, and it just keeps pulling off the connectors. So my little box of spring clips came today, so I've used those, and they're not going to pull off now. They clamp reasonably well on that soft tube. So fuel is all out of the way. You can see I've got a little filter in there. See that it's working. So that's everything up to temperature. Yeah, these hoses are hot. Oh, I've just squirted coolant out. And I was going to say there are no leaks, but there is. That is still leaking from the front seal, which is very disappointing. I don't know where else that could be coming from. It's not hot. It's not oil. So I need to keep an eye on that. Very, very annoying. I'm sure I fitted that seal correctly. I made sure the back of the flywheel was all nice and polished. I put Hylamar on the spacer, which is what it's suggested to do. So I'm not sure where that's coming from. I'll keep an eye on that. Oh, very disappointing. I was all pleased just to say it's been running for 10-15 minutes with no leaks, but it's leaking. The coolant, that's okay. That's just expansion overflow. It's not a pressurized system. A lot of people actually mount a little catch bottle, and so anything drips out, it just gets sucked back up if it needs to. Also stops it going on the road. But I think I've now got all of the things I need to do the wiring. I also got these little cable markers, so they're actually numbered. But the main reason I wanted them was for the different colours, because the original loom is pretty much all black, as far as I can see. There's some red, but it has these little coloured sleeves on it, and I could use heat shrink for those, but I think these little cable markers, I've got enough colours there, and also the numbers will help match the ends of the wires up. So I think that'll be the next thing, is sorting out the wiring. For now, I've got dogs with me. I will probably put some gloves on and give these a good scrub and see if the surface rust has come off them. You can see that it's been doing something because of the bubbles in there. So I think if I rub those down with a Scotch-Brite, they'll be clean, and then I can dry them and prime them and maybe look at welding them back together. Well, it's super disappointing that it's still leaking from the front. Unless it's just a little bit of oil that was left in there from when I assembled it, but it looks like there was slightly more than that. I was thinking, oh, I need to check if it's still British, because it wasn't leaking anything, but no, it's proven it is. The footboards are pretty clean. I did give them a bit more of a wire brush, and since I'm not going to weld them tonight, I've put them back in the phosphoric solution just to take care of the last little bits of surface rust. And hopefully tomorrow night I can weld those up. I couldn't weld them tonight because I've got dogs in here, and Zelda's not a welder. Are you, Zelda? No. The other thing is I did play around with oil gauges. The one I wanted to use, the nice little 0 to 40 psi one, which would be nice, doesn't read correctly. Reads goes right off the end of the scale. So I did compare this one to about another 2 or 3 gauges, and they're all similar. So I think this one will work fine. And it's 0 to 75, so straight up is about right, which is what you want for gauges, of course. This is what they do in aircraft, where they rotate the gauges so that the normal position is the needle sticking straight up. They do it on race cars as well, so that if you quickly glance at the instrument panel, you just look for all the needles pointing straight up, and you know everything's normal. So I think that'll work quite well for that little oil gauge as well. I forgot to mention the seat. This is actually the seat off the other bike, but since that's an original seat, it's missing the strap. Somebody's basically riveted it to the base plate rather than having it strapped on. But that's the original seat still, so I think it's probably better to use an original seat on this that's in pretty good condition rather than making a new one. I can make a new one for the other bike. So that seat will work fine there. I'm going to keep conditioning it. The vinyl's gone a little bit strange in places, but I think if I keep conditioning that, that should come up nicely. Tonight I've been working on the footboards for the bike. Do have dogs with me again, but I sort of partition them off in the little pub area with my my outside screen. I was able to put that across to keep the dogs over there, so I could do the welding without them staring at things. And I've got these footboards back together and welded up. They're not perfect. You can see this one's got a funny seam in it where it's bent across. I think it was like that from the factory. I don't think these things were particularly well made, but I've got them more or less flattened out. I've got the edges straightened up. I've got them welded back together. They're more or less the right shape now. The inside is covered with weld through primer, and there's these little drain holes. So I will spray the insides of those with something to prevent corrosion, probably lanolin spray, something like that. That'll creep into all the seams. Or else possibly fish oil. I think I've got some of that in a spray bottle. The only problem with that is it stinks and it'll drip out all the time. I'd rather have it smelling of soggy sheep than dead fish. But I think now I can just basically slap a coat of black paint on these. I do have the rubber material coming to stick on the top, so you won't even see most of this. That's why I didn't bother trying to get it too perfect, and they should be fine for the bike. They're much better than they were, that's for sure. So these basically fit. Something like that. I may need to, oh right, there we go. They go in like that, I think. No, they must go the other way. They must go like that. That would make more sense. So something like that. I'll pick the best looking side profile, because of course one side you don't see. So I'll figure out which ones look best from the side. That probably should go that way around. I welded up all the little cracks. One side definitely had more cracks than the other, and I'm guessing that's the outside, because that's the one that's going to get knocked all the time. And also these fronts were cracked where they bolt on. But I think I've just got time to get a coat of paint on those, a couple of coats of paint, and then it'll be go in for the night. The footboards have a coat of paint. That's the really good kill rust epoxy paint. It's great. It'll stick to anything. You don't need a primer. I actually find it works better if you don't use the primer, as long as the steel's all nice and clean. But being a proper enamel, that'll take days to dry. But I am waiting for the rubber stuff to arrive, so that's okay. We'll leave those hanging there for a bit. Tomorrow, when they're mostly dry, I'll probably move them. I put them near the, hang them up somewhere near the doors, because the doors get nice and warm during the day. So it helps sort of bake the paint dry. And that front seal is still leaking, nowhere near as badly, but that's just really annoying. Apparently that's reasonably common by the sounds of it. And somebody asked a question in the comments. It was a good question, because I had wondered about this as well, about why does the position of the flywheel actually matter? Because it's not keyed at all, so it can go on in any position, and it will mostly work in any position. The reason you put it on in a particular way is so that you can look through the little hole and line up the hole in the flywheel to know you're at top dead center, so you can set the timing. The other reason I was reading about in the forum is this bike, it actually has a, you can't read it unfortunately because the switch is so worn out. There is what's called an emergency start position, and I believe that's for if the battery is completely flat, you can actually start it just on the generator. It's hard to tell from this diagram how that works, but what will happen is as you flick it over, the generator will generate enough voltage just to get it to fire, to get the spark plugs to work. So apparently the position of the flywheel is also calculated so that when it's in that correct position, you'll get the maximum voltage out of it just when it needs to spark. So it makes it easier to start. That was apparently the second reason. I don't know if anyone actually bothers with the emergency start. I'll be quite interested to try it. When I get this all wired up, I can try disconnecting the battery and seeing if it'll start in that position. I'm assuming then, I think it's for if your battery is quite flat. I don't know how that would work, because the battery effectively acts as a ballast and it holds the voltage down. Otherwise the generator will probably easily put out 20-30 volts, and if you had any of the lights on when it was doing that, it'll blow the bulbs. So I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to use that position. Seats come up nicely with a bit of vinyl conditioner. Again, not perfect, but for the nature of this bike, I think it's going to work fine. It's definitely got that oily rag look to it. Tonight I have, just noticed that's a bit bent in, might need to just straighten that bottom edge. I've put the what do you call them, footboards in place, and the leg shields. A little bit of fiddling. One side went on really well, the other side I did have to just open up the hole a little bit because things must have moved when I took it apart and put it back together. So the back hole on the other side I just needed to grind off about 0.5 millimeter to get the bolt to go through. So I did that. I fitted the speedo cable, which kind of comes up in here. I had to take this off, which was a bit of a pain to get the cable up above it, but that's in place now. It seems to be working. I was able to just rock the bike backwards and forwards and see that the needle moved, so it is doing something. I do need to shorten the throttle cable. There's just a bit too much loose cable in there and not enough adjustment on this. So tomorrow I'll take the carb end off and just resolder the little brass end piece 1/4 of an inch further up. That shouldn't be too bad. The horn's just loosely in place. The headlamp thing is just loosely in place. I have everything I need now to do the wiring except for this sleeving. So this piece I can reuse, but I don't have anything for the bit at the bottom. You can buy sort of PVC sleeving, but I only need about 1 meter of it, and I don't want to pay for a 50 or 20 meter roll, whatever it is. so I might use something else for that. But that piece of wiring you don't really see anyway, because that's all up inside the bike. So I can just use something a bit more modern. If I use anything at all, I might just bundle the wires together and leave it as that. So this hasn't been run for a couple of days, so let's see if we can do a proper cold start on it. Oil pressure gauge, I'll have to figure out how I'm going to mount that. I could just do a really short tube and mount the gauge straight to the top of this so you can see it, or I might make a little bracket down here somewhere. Let's see. That's the fuel on. It's not in gear. We'll try it without choke. I'll just give it a little bit of, couple of presses on the float bowl thing. A little bit of throttle. Oh, I'd forgotten I'd taken that off. And I had slackened off this little thingy. So this sets the tension. Oh, a little bit more. It's like the little friction thing. That's getting close. So let's see. First pull. 45 psi. Oh, it died because it's not warmed up. But it definitely starts easily, which means I've got the ignition in the right place. Shut off the fuel. So I think tomorrow I will start on the wiring. I'm still waiting for the clutch cable and the brake cable. I really hope I can get the clutch cable in there without having to take everything apart. That's going to be interesting. May have to take the back wheel off, I'm not sure. But it's getting there, it's almost done, it looks almost done. But we'll see how far we get this weekend. One other thing, I forgot that my roll of ribbed matting arrived. So that's what that looks like. I ended up getting 2 meters off it. One, because it's useful stuff to have. This was from the cheapest place I could find. The shipping was included in the cost and it was still the cheapest. So that was really good, and it turned up really quickly with a little bag of sweets, which was nice. I got 2 meters off it. I only need a little bit for the bike, obviously, but I'm going to use that in the Riley as well. So I will probably line much of the tail with it and all behind here, because otherwise it's just plain aluminium. This happens to be 900 wide, so a strip of that will just perfectly fit in there, and I think finish that off nicely. It looks like spiders are taking up residence in the Riley, so I really need to get back on it. I have done a little bit of hammering on the guard, so I haven't completely abandoned it, but I want to get this bike out of the way, just get it done. So yeah, I think that'll work well. I might give the paint a little bit longer to dry, and I may need to get some really good contact type adhesive to glue that on, or maybe shoe adhesive, something like that might be good. But it's pretty easy, it's just 2 strips that get glued down to the footboards. It's Saturday. It's another really nice day. Still no rain. And this almighty mess is because I've been spending the morning or the day doing the wiring for the Velocette. This is the little switch panel and ammeter. That's all wired up. I think I've used more connectors than there normally would be, but it's just so I can keep the wiring tidier. If there's an extra join in the cable, sometimes it makes it easier. It's another point of failure, but these shouldn't fail anyway if you do them properly. So this is all wired up, ready to go. Most of the bike is wired up. The headlamp is wired up, the horn not quite. I've got another wire to do there. This controller is wired up with new wires. These are the wires that come from the generator and for the ignition. And you can see I've used these little coloured tags. I'm not really following any existing code. I've just made up my own more or less. But it's just so that you can match the ends of the wires. So you can see here, there's a ground, power there for the pilot light, power for the headlamps. The regulator is down in there. I left out the original one. It's broken anyway. There's no point at being there. So the little rectify, not regulator, is in there. I'm not using a regulator. They originally didn't have one and they worked fine. So that's what I'm going to go with. Those are my connections to the battery. I have the positive is switched and fused. There's a little blade fuse holder down in there. So the battery will live in there. Normally the cables will come out here, but I've sort of blanked that off. Just put a grommet in there. There's the little earth connection there. So that all works. I've hooked up the headlamps just to make sure the switch works and the horn switch works. So I need to do the wires that go to the back of the car, back of the bike rather. So tail and stop lamp and an earth. It goes to the switch. This is pretty straightforward. I've also made it negative earth rather than positive earth. The main reason I did that is because the fuse I've got is in the red positive wire, and I wanted to fuse the positive, not the ground. And it would get confusing if you had a red wire that was on the negative side. I just find negative earth much simpler, and it's easy to check. If you just check which battery terminal is grounded to the chassis, you can figure out pretty quickly. But I find negative earth is much more intuitive. The only real difference is you swap the battery around effectively, and you swap the ammeter around. Everything else is non-polarized, so it doesn't matter anyway. I do need to make sure I get these little earths. I don't know where the earth for the engine actually goes. There is an earth that goes to the front leg shield, I remember that, and there is another earth that goes somewhere onto the engine. I have to remember to do that, so I have another connector. The good thing with using these bullet connectors is you can use the 4-way ones, so you can easily splice in extra wires. And it took all of my crimping tools to do all the different sorts of crimps and things I needed. These are the original earth terminals, so I should be able to reuse those, I think. If I replace the bullets on the end. But that's all I've got time for today. It's actually 4 years since we've moved in here, so we're going out for dinner. But we're getting there. So I think tomorrow I should have basically have the wiring all done, which is good. The clutch, now that could be interesting because you do have to adjust the clutch lever, and I don't remember doing that. I don't think I did. There is this little tool that's in the service manual. I 3D printed this, and what you're supposed to do is, this is supposed to go down in there, and it lines up against the little clutch lever, and you're supposed to look through and check that the holes line up. That's a bit tricky when it's all in the bike. Apparently you can get in there to adjust the little eccentric bolt if you need to, but I think what I'm going to have to do is just when the clutch cable arrives, just set it up and see if it works. It's going to be tricky doing it any other way without taking the body off again. I really don't want to do that. But that's the other reason I've put extra connectors in the wiring loom, is so I can disconnect things more easily in the future if I need to. I hope I don't have to. I don't have any proper dielectric grease, so I'm using the old trick of basically filling the connector, the bullets up with Vaseline, which works fine. I think people have been doing that for donkey's years with no problems. So hopefully this all works. I will check all the wiring very carefully, and I did buy a resettable fuse, which is around here somewhere. There it is. Just for the initial testing. It's just a little 10 amp fuse, little circuit breaker thing. So I'll use that. But I'm going to leave the mess for now. I will sort that all out tomorrow when I finish things up. I may actually do some more when I come home tonight. Once again, it's a very nice day and there's a very big mess, but I've now pretty much finished the wiring on the bike. It's not 100% finished because all the wires are there, everything's wired up, everything's working, but I have ordered some sort of heat sleeving that I'm going to use for the 4 wires that come out of the generator. I've already managed to melt one of them on the exhaust. One of these will need a little bit of heat shrink over it just to repair, just in there I think it was, where it touched the exhaust and melted. That's why it's up around the gear lever at the moment. So all the wiring is up in here. I will cable tie that all together nicely when it's complete, but here we go. Kind of clips in place. Bet these rattle. That's one of the wires that goes to the generator. That's why that one's hanging out at the moment, but the rest of them, when this is all fixed, that'll come out of its sleeving and then run up inside here somewhere. I haven't figured out exactly where it goes. As long as it's out of the way of the gear lever and above the side of the body so you don't see it, I guess it doesn't matter. It'll all be tucked up in there. There's 3 wires running to the back for the tail lights, and the batteries in that little box. Got the fuse on the side of it. Wires are just tucked down away. So if we turn that on, the switch is in the off position. That would be ignition on. Oh, there's a bit of smoke there. Something is shorting out. Not sure what's going on there, but I need to look into that. I figured out what was burning. It wasn't any of the wiring, it was actually the switch itself. There seemed to be muck on the contacts. I had cleaned it before. I don't know if I managed to get grease on it or something like that, but there was muck on the contact there, and I've cleaned that off now with my electrical clean and a cotton bud, and got whatever it was that was in there off. But that seemed to be what the problem is. I need to keep an eye on that just to make sure that switch is all right. But they're pretty solid, so that should be fine. I'll put this all back together again now. Okay, we'll try this again. Power is on. Normally the springs are rotated into these little things, or these little things rotate onto the springs so you can lock the seat down. But it's in the off position, that's emergency start. I did try that and I couldn't get it to work. That is the pilot light position. So that leaves the tail light and the little pilot light and the headlamp on. This is off. I did also have to take the ammeter apart again, just to get that to work. It was sticking still. So that's been taken apart and refettled. The needle is slightly off center. There's no way to adjust it. So it's reading about half an amp, even though it should be reading 0, half an amp discharge. Other than that, it's reasonably accurate. I mean, it's not a precision instrument, but it's kind of good enough. That should be, that's off. That's ignition on. So there's a slight draw there. That's your headlamps. It is a 2-filament bulb, but I tried it last night, just temporarily hooked up, and I couldn't see any difference between high beam and low beam. Both are feeble, but it does something. I'm not sure. The bulb isn't handed, and it doesn't have it isn't marked, which is the top. The 6-volt ones say top, so you know which way up to put them. This one can go in either way, so I'm not even sure I've got it up the right way, but we'll figure that out later. The horn works. The horn works very well because it's a 6-volt horn running off 12 volts. That won't burn it out unless you really laid on the button. I'm not sure if you can hear that. The dogs don't mind the motorcycle at all, even with the engine running, but they don't like the horn. If I beep the horn, they bark at me. Then there is the side light position, which again just has the pilot light and the tail light at the back. I don't think you'd ever use that because in New Zealand you have to have the headlamps on. And the other thing I did, this again is temporary wiring until I run the loom neatly on the inside. I don't know how long to leave these wires. So this is for the brake switch. So that works quite nicely. Being a bike in New Zealand, there's a bit of number 8 wire on it. That's what I'm using to go between the brake lever and the spring. That works fine. So that's the headlamp on. So if we go into the ignition position, this should start. I've also been playing with the throttle cable routing, and some of the bikes, I think it might be the later ones, actually have a cowling here and the cable goes in through the side of that, so I think it must run somewhere like that. I didn't have to shorten it, which was good, and that does seem to keep it out of the way of everything. Again, these are just temporary Velcro ties. I am using modern cable ties on it. I know that's not period correct, but it's practical. What they actually used in period were little, they weren't Velcro, but they were little cable, little cloth type tie wrap things. So this isn't too far off. Like I say, it's practical. I don't really care if it's not factory. It's going to hold it all together. So this, get everything out of the way, a little bit of throttle. And the current does balance quite nicely. So if you put the headlamps on, there's a big drain, but if you give it a little bit of throttle, it starts charging. So the charging system is working. I think it's designed so that you don't hook the battery, but still worth keeping an eye on it. And that's that. So hopefully the heat shielding stuff doesn't take too long to arrive, and once it does I can properly tidy those wires up and tuck them away up under here somewhere. I may be able to get hook something onto the back of the little brackets that hold the fuel tank in place, hook a cable tie on that and run the cables up under there. Any extra length will all be hidden back down in here. There's a bit of space in there, so I'll just tie them up out of the way. I did try to make the cables all the right lengths, but it's pretty hard when you're doing it individual cable by cable. I don't know what the original loom would look like, but yeah. These wiring always takes you far longer than you think. It takes me far longer than I think, and I know it's going to take me far longer than I think. So I think I've spent about a day and a half, nearly 2 days doing it. But there's lots of fiddly soldering and bits and pieces. But yeah, that's almost done. So all that's left to do is tidy up the wiring, of course, cut and glue on the rubber strips on the footboards, and clutch cable and front brake cable, which I'm still waiting for from the UK. And then that should be it. Still tidying up. My big bag of electrical stuff, a lot of this came from the UK. One thing I found is these modern, supposedly Lucas type bullets, they're not very good. It's almost like they're too short, unless it's because these ones are meant to be crimped on and I was soldering them. I don't know, I'm pretty sure that they're meant to be used or able to be used both ways. The way I was doing that was using my little helping hands and basically taking the little brass piece. I can get one. So these are just hollow, and basically what I do is I grip those in the little helping hands and then fill them up with solder, tin the wire, and then while this is still hot you sort of push the wire in with a little bit of extra heat and then hold it very carefully until it sets. It takes quite a few seconds for it to solidify, but you don't want it moving while it's cooling down or you'll get a dry solder joint. But the solder part of these connections is absolutely fine. If you do it properly, I don't think they'll ever go wrong. It's the little joiners just aren't very good, and these came from a proper UK auto electrical supplier type place. They're not just cheap off AliExpress ones, and they're still not very good. So I need to see if maybe there is better ones around. I think they'll work, but they just don't seem as good as the original sort of 50s, the sort of things they used in MGBs and minis and things like that, I guess. Those original ones work fine. So I'll see how it goes. What I will do is, where there are bundles of these, this is why I wanted to keep the wires all similar lengths, so all the connectors are kind of close together, so I can sort of bundle them and tie all the loose wires together so there's no individual wires that are likely to sort of pull out. I think that'll help. The other thing I did on the back of the little crimps like this, you can see I've pretty much used every crimp tool I've got, including this one which has multiple jaws, which is really useful. But I was able to crimp on the little ring terminals, and instead of using heat shrink on them, I've been using these, what are called Hellerman sleeves, Hellerman Tiger. So these are little rubber sleeves that there's a special tool. This is the tool. It's like a 3-pronged tool that opens up, and the idea is you sort of put the sleeve on there and then the tool sort of stretches it open. It can be a little bit tricky to use. There is apparently proper lube that you get to use with these, because what I find is it can be hard to get them off the tool, to get it to pull off the prongs. But I did discover also you have to be really careful about trying to pull them off with your fingers, because this is kind of a machined thing and the edges of those are razor sharp, and I did manage to slice my thumb quite a number of times trying to get the little sleeves to slide off. So I should look into getting the proper lubricant for those. I wonder if tire lube would work, because that's safe to use on rubber. it kind of disappears. I think it's just soap basically, but something like that might work pretty well. So I use those on any of the connections where I could, like over the back of the little ring terminals and things. Put those back in the bag. It's always good to have a few of these things floating around loose in the bottom of the bag, because when you're doing your next job and your little bag of connectors runs out, which it always will, you can go ferreting around in the bottom of the bag and find another couple of loose ones. But you can see I've got plenty of those terminals there. The other thing I discovered is I had bought all new bulbs. The bulbs also aren't very good quality. So I bought a bunch of these stop lamps because I think the Riley uses the same ones, but these are actually wrong. The bike, these have parallel pins. The bike actually uses offset pins. So I've got a bulb very precariously balanced in there. I did actually smash one because I plugged it in. It didn't go in properly and then popped out and smashed on the ground. So I do need to get the right base bulb for that. It's BA15 BAD, because it's double contact 15 millimeter offset pin. So I still need to get one of those. And I think what I will do for the oil gauge is I'm going to make a little bracket that comes off this bolt, and I will sit the oil gauge down in there, basically, something like that. So it's out of the way but easily visible. I think that should work pretty well. So, and these wires will tuck up under there so you won't really see them. They'll come down under here. I think if I can get it the other side of the radiator hose up in there, I think that's where they'll need to go. But the battery installation all looks pretty neat. Oh no, does the seat lock on? Yeah, it's got little lugs. Let's see, there and there. So you need to start with the bigger end and then it can be done. And I have reattached the front cover. I wasn't quite sure where the earths ran. There was definitely one that goes to there, I know that. I just earthed directly to this. I figured that's the best place. And I just looped the wire up out of the way. I've run very solid earths, so this goes back to a connector. The connector goes straight back to the earth on the frame, which is back here, into the battery, and the headlamp is earthed as well. There's an earth inside there. The switch earth's down here. That's the earth for the horn, basically. That sleeve's a little bit big, but yeah, I might need to adjust that one a little bit. Just looks a bit funny. Possibly put a slightly longer wire on it, but that's okay. These wires come under here. Again, I used one of those aluminium sleeves. I just cut it down to make a little rubber thing to hold those wires, because this obviously being attached between the body and the front forks, that cabling has to move. So it's looking pretty good, I think. I was wondering about rounding off these corners a little bit, just for those panniers, the aluminium boxes that are in there, or even shortening them. So almost finished. The other thing I found super useful are these little cable markers. You just cut them off. They're color coded and numbered, and you slide them onto the wires. I found that really helped, especially because the loom on this bike is pretty much all black or red. so using these made it much easier. I did try to match the numbers where I could, but that wasn't always possible. But I'll probably use these on the Riley as well, just because it makes it so easy to just match up the wires when you're trying to connect everything up. And you can check things as you go, and you know you've done it because it's got the little marker on it. And I'm just halfway through tidying up. I did replace that earth for the horn just because that was going to bug me. That's the sort of thing that would make me not sleep at night if I hadn't fixed that. So that's good. We should actually see if it works. It's off. Yeah. Very loud. Yeah, front oil leak. Probably end up having to take it all apart again at some point to try and fix that. I'll see how bad it is. If it's a small drip like that every so often, maybe I can live with it. It's kind of like every single one of my other British vehicles, leaving its mark everywhere. But yeah, I'm not sure what I could do there. Just I need to check if apparently sometimes the little plate the oil seal is in might be too far back, and it doesn't quite rub on the boss on the back of the flywheel. So I have heard of people sort of shimming it out a little bit. Maybe you could use a thicker gasket, something like that, to get the seal just to shift the position where it's rubbing on the boss in case there is wear there. I did clean it all and polished it all. It didn't look like there should have been a problem. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that is actually leaking from. So I think I was tidying up. I do need to cut the grass, but I think I'll finish tidying up and I might quickly make that bracket for the oil pump, just because I don't like having it just dangling there like that in the way. And yeah, I think that's definitely it for today. Let's, I think that's high and that's low. It's really hard to tell. When I was trying it last night, it did kind of make a difference what the positioning was, but not a huge amount of difference. Yeah, that's not too bad. Final thing for this weekend, made a little bracket for the oil gauge there. Doesn't get in the way of the gear lever, doesn't get in the way of the starter. It's fairly solidly mounted. I did take it apart just to clean the glass. I sort of oiled the body. I didn't really de-rust it or anything. I kept it pretty grubby. When it's lined up, it goes into gear so easily. Started down there. You don't start it while you're sitting on it though, I think. It'd be quite awkward. Don't think you could do it.